Hello and welcome to the SHIPSHAPE podcast, a series of podcasts where we meet amazing people and talk about their experiences, personal, technical, and all related to the maritime world. Come and dive in, dive in, dive in.
Today on the SHIPSHAPE podcast, we have Captain Lauren Beagan, maritime legal expert and founder of the Maritime Professor and Squall Strategies. Your two hosts today are Meryl Charette and T. Myself, I'm a live-aboard on a Tashing Toshiba 36 in Boston, Massachusetts.
And this is Talha, and I'm coming at you from my boat Rail Swagger, which is currently in Virginia. And thank you so much, Lauren, for joining us on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here and to chat with you guys. And I love that you're living aboard vessels. That's so cool.
Yeah.
I mean, living the dream, right? That's so cool.
Right?
So, Lauren, where are you recording this from?
Yeah, so I'm actually just south of you. So I'm down south coast of Massachusetts. So I kind of say like I'm Cape Cod adjacent, kind of down by Plymouth. I'm down in Lakeville, Massachusetts.
Nice. Getting cold, isn't it?
So I'm a northern person. I'm from Michigan originally, but I'm looking forward to the snow.
Really? Nice. Okay, so where should we start? So you've done so many cool things. You're our first lawyer on the show, so we've got so many law-related questions from you anyway. But maybe let's just start like at the beginning, like what got you into boating to start with?
Yeah. So, I mean, like I said, I'm so happy to be here. So, all lawyers, right? We have to start off with this is all educational purposes. There's no attorney-client privilege created by this video or this podcast. Yeah. So I don't know. You always got to start with that, right?
If you give us a disclaimer, we'll even put it on screen. Okay? I
don't want anyone to call. I rely on advice. No, it wasn't advice. It's just educational discussions. But so I'm a maritime lawyer. So, it's a pretty funny niche. I just really loved maritime going through. I got my captain's license when I was in college because I wanted to work on a party catamaran. I was working on already, wanted to make more money. So I just figured I'll just go get my captain's license, 50 ton. And I grew up sailing on Lake Michigan with my dad. So, it's just kind of like, I mean, you guys know, once it's in your blood, you just kind of, you're always drawn back to the ocean or back to the water and you just want to be out there. I feel like whenever I'm like out on the water too much, I start to like, forget real life and all you want to do is be out on the water. So, but no, I just figured everybody's got to work. And so if I got to talk about stuff that I like, then that, then I wouldn't be work. It wouldn't be, it'd be kind of more fun. So that was my intention way back when. And, sometimes I've taken non-law jobs, I've taken law jobs, but I've always talked about maritime in all my jobs. So, to what that's brought me to now is just, I have a lot of different experience with maritime in a lot of different ways. That makes me, I opened this consulting company. I feel like it makes me a little bit more able to understand what people are going through, understand kind of the bigger picture and not just kind of like, some lawyers just get very like, which is great sometimes, but like focused and like obsessed with little things. I like to see the bigger picture and kind of assess the whole thing. And I feel like I can get better advice that way.
So what about the water, the ocean really attracts you to it?
What doesn't, right? I mean, so like the freedom, right? Like the disconnect, the gumption that's involved with being on the water, right? If something goes wrong, you have to figure it out. And like when things go wrong on the water, it's not small stuff, right? Like especially like boats or whatever, like you got to figure it out. And like it gets, especially if if you guys are sailors. So like sailing versus power boats, like sailing is just everything's like you're out there, you're doing your own thing. Like it gets really loud when it gets like chaotic, right? And you have to kind of like find the peace, like separate yourself from all the chaos around you and solve the like little problem that's right there. And like you solve it and you're like, yeah. But like nobody was there to see it. You could never recreate it. You could never like properly explain it. But like that moment of just like, yeah, man, I just figured that out. We almost sunk and I just figured that out. Right? Like, I mean, and it's not always that extreme, but like in the moment, it feels like it.
Yep. Everything.
Like I was out sailing with my dad. Yeah, I was out sailing with my dad when I was super young and the mast broke in half. And I remember like looking up at him and being like, oh my God, what do we do? We figure it out. Like, and that was kind of, I think that was pre cell phones, like, you know, but like he just figured, I forget what we did. I think somebody was driving past and came and saved the day. But yeah, one time I don't know if I should say this, but one time I was out in college. I took some of my friends out, and we were staying up at my Nana's house up in northern Michigan. And my uncle had his little sailboat. It was just like a little, you know, dinghy sailor, probably 15 feet, maybe even less, 10 feet. And I forgot to put the plug in. So like the plug on the back. So like, right. So the plug on the back, like when you get to shore, you can unplug it and it can drain out all that water, but you got to put the plug back in. Otherwise it'll start taking on water, right? So I wasn't even thinking, you know, I think it had been a long weekend. We were drinking a little. So like, you know, it's Sunday. It's the last sail before we leave. And we all hopped in, we went. And when you're sailing, like, it's not going to just completely take on water, right? So we're sailing along and like, I'm like, what is going on? Like, we're not like really splashing over the edge that much. Like, why are we getting so much water in here? We get to like just beyond like the next little cove over, and like, we're starting to like go down. So like, you know, like, okay, so you kind of get to that moment again where you're like chaos around you and you're like, oh my God, okay, I don't even know if we have like all life vests on. Like, I think we might have thrown a few in, like, luckily. And there were a couple fishermen around us, which was good, but like, then they started like zinging our boat, trying to like come over to like save us too. And so then I'm like, oh my God, now like the danger is this power boater who like doesn't know what to do. And he's like about to run us over. So luckily picked up all my girlfriends that were kind of swimming around being like, oh my God, what are we doing? And so story, right? So then I was like, but I didn't want to lose my uncle's boat. Like I needed to like save this boat. So like I literally just swam it in. Like I just I hooked a line on the front and like pleated it off and just like swam it in over my shoulder. Because I didn't trust the power boater to like do a good job of pulling it in. So I was just like, whatever, screw it. Like you take the girls, like I'm taking the boat. And so we found a shore station, which in Michigan, it's all saltwater or freshwater, excuse me. So, you know, you just kind of keep your boat like just lifted above the water. You don't really have to worry about all the salt erosion. Found just a random shore station, hooked it on that, lifted it up, and was like...
Drained it out.
Yeah, drained it out. Was like, yep, that's the problem. There was no plug. Luckily, my grandpa lived up the way, so we were able to go up to him, and, you know, I show up from the beach. Like, walk up to the house, and he's like, where are you coming from? How'd you get here? Grabbed a plug. He drove me back over because it was kind of a far walk along the beach there. Put the plug in. We sailed back home. I mean, the girls luckily were great. They were like, yeah, let's get back in the boat. I was like, are you sure? Like,
love it.
You can get a ride back. Like, no, we can do this. We trust you. I'm like, are you sure?
Nice. Yeah, you'd proven yourself by then as well, right?
I guess so.
Swam it in. So she can do that if it happens the second time. Yeah. No, that's huge.
We sailed back just fine, but I don't even know why that story came up, but it's a good one.
It's a cool story. Yeah, you don't get to hear that too often. And this is way back in the day, like you said, before cell phones and this and everything.
Yeah, right. I mean, you just, and like, what do you do? You just figure it out. So, like, okay, the question was like, what draws you to sailing? What draws you to the ocean? The figure it out moment, right? Like now I can use that. Like, well, I've had to swim a boat back to shore, so like this doesn't seem that bad, right? Like whatever, like the comparative like land side problem is that I'm having, I'm like, oh, this isn't that bad as like swim a boat to shore.
Nice.
Yeah, I had one person, and it was like a friend's girlfriend, and she was like a professional swimmer, and she was like, oh, if there's ever a problem, I'll just swim the boat to like the dock. And I'm like, you're not going to swim a 12-ton boat back to the dock. Like, it's just not happening.
Right. I mean, like, what business did I have swimming a 10-foot boat? But it worked. It was kind of like a strange, like, you know, I'm by no means a professional swimmer, but I was like kind of side stroking it, like kind of like backstroke. Like I was like anything to like just try to get some momentum and movement. It worked, and we didn't have to go far. But
at what point did you end up getting into the law of the sea?
Yes, kind of a meandering, I guess, progression. But like I said, grew up on Lake Michigan, you know, grew up sailing there. So went down to Hope College, which is on kind of the western side of Michigan. Had a great time there, joined the sailing team. So I started to kind of have these inklings of like exposure to maritime, like I said, sailing team. And was really drawn to international, took some languages, studied abroad, and was like, how do I combine all of this together? Like, I want to do international, obviously like the water. And I was like, well, water is inherently international. So maybe I pull in, right, law of water. And so like, what does that look like? And so I kind of learned about Tulane Law School down in New Orleans. And I was like, I really want to do like, maybe I want to do litigation, but like, maybe I don't necessarily. I was kind of interested in the government side of stuff. So found my way out to Rhode Island, where they had a joint degree program, so a law program and a master's in marine affairs. And so I hadn't really been on the East Coast before, but thought it was a kind of newer program. And they were like, you can kind of build whatever paths you want. And I was like, well, I've heard about this Arctic law, kind of interested in that, kind of interested just generally in learning more about maritime. Hadn't really been exposed to like law of the sea yet, as it relates to kind of like the international constitution of the seas. So I don't know. Luck would have it, was able to get into Roger Williams, found a great program, was able to maneuver and, like I said, kind of draft and create what I wanted out of the program, and was really kind of drawn to Arctic law. So that was my major master's paper at the University of Rhode Island. So it was the master's in marine affairs. So you had to do a master's paper. So that's what I did was kind of mapping of the Arctic, the extended continental shelf, and the Arctic. And so what that was all the subsea and like the land masses under the water and the extensions and the claims of the countries basically up there, and how they did that and what they were doing. And so I really kind of got hooked into like, okay, so this is pretty sweet. Right around the same time, Russia had planted the flag, on the North Pole, saying we claim the North Pole. There's not a lot there, it's not like the moon. You don't just claim it. Like there's like a prescriptive process. There's an actual process for claiming subsea areas. So at the time it was like, well, that's cool, Russia, but like that doesn't mean anything like geopolitically, that's something that is good for you, but like that we have a rule book on how to claim. So that would kind of be like, your neighbor coming over to your land and putting a flag and be like, well, that's cute, but like there are ways of zoning and like there's property right, like so I had kind of like studied that and started kind of pulling that way. And so my first job out of law school was not first job, I think my first job was working at like a title and closings company, because coming out of law school in 2009, right, the last recession, it was wherever you could get a job, but was still focused on maritime. So maybe just 6 months, a year after that, was still networking down to DC and was able to get a job, a contract position at the State Department. So it was a contract position with State Department, was where my office was, with NOAA, and then one of those like third-party private contractors working on the Extended Continental Shelf project. And so that's what it was kind of helping to assess the legal side of things, the regulatory side of things, kind of using some of that data and that scientific stuff that was coming from these mapping missions and pulling that over into the United Nations Convention for the Law of the Sea, and how they kind of use the like I said, the rule book of Law of the Sea to identify what the U.S. had a claim over in the Arctic. Super awesome, so fun. But it was right around the time that public student loan forgiveness was kind of coming up, and so it was a contract position that didn't count for that 10-year loan forgiveness. And coming out of law school, I mean, we all know it's like hefty loans. It's like at least $200,000 coming out of law school. So like, if you don't have any assistance or whatever, like that's a lot of money. So was able to find my way over to the Federal Maritime Commission in DC, which was an international attorney position. And the Federal Maritime Commission, the FMC, is the independent regulatory agency for ocean shipping. So really like all these containers, everybody knows who they are now, or not everybody, like society has at least heard of them now. Prior to the global congestion problems that we were having, even people in DC that were maritime people didn't know what the FMC was. It was just this like very specific niche supply chain, ocean shipping regulatory agency. Now it's taken on a large presence. But yeah, so I got to work there. And from all of those experiences, specifically the FMC, kind of got me to where I am now. I was able to come up north, and now I have my consulting company and the Maritime Professor. The consulting company is Skull Strategies, and the Maritime Professor is the e-learning company. So
what made you sort of separate from the FMC job that you were doing and start your own thing? What made that jump happen?
Yeah, so I was down at the FMC. I loved it. So like I said, I was the international affairs attorney. I was part of the U.S. government delegation for any of the international negotiations for maritime related things. So we would work with the Department of Transportation's Maritime Administration. So MARAD, that's the kind of maritime agency everybody kind of knows. And then State Department, actually. So I got to kind of connect back with State Department, their maritime and their kind of transportation division. So the three of us were the U.S. government delegation, essentially, for maritime negotiations. So we would negotiate with China and Vietnam and Japan. And so the larger the kind of negotiating partner, the more likely we had politicals involved. And so I would do kind of the prep work instead of sitting at the actual table or being the principal negotiator. So that would happen, obviously, with China and European Commission and kind of all the large parties. But when it was like a smaller party, it was just me and the other two guys there. And so it was so fun. It was so fun. Just had such a great time. But, life happens. And so my boyfriend of the time, he was up in Newport and I was down in DC, and we got engaged, and we were like, where do we go? Okay, so we got engaged. Like, do we come up to Rhode Island or do we stay down in DC? He works for the government, so he was kind of, okay, maybe I could come to DC. But, we have family up here. And so we just started working our options. And I was so fortunate to get a job at the Port of Boston, a Massport. So Massachusetts Port Authority up in Boston, and work at the port. And that's, so I worked at the Federal Maritime Commission doing all this kind of high level international negotiations, talking about all of these things that I'd learned in school. And, I did have my 50-10, so I had a little bit of kind of street cred for understanding the industry, but I had never worked at a port. And so now having the opportunity to go work at a port after working at the FMC was so it just connected all the dots for me. It went from this negotiation theory, I probably did it backwards, right? I definitely should have worked at a port before I went and regulated the industry and kind of assisted there. But it was so great. I got to go to the port and see everything, boots on the dock, see everything. And so I got to know some of the terminal operators and some of the kind of terminal managers. And I was like, whenever a boat comes in, let me know. I want to come see everything, even if it's a boring boat and they're just taking on water, or they're just filling up water, not taking on water, obviously. If they're sinking, sure, let me know. I want to come see. But so we had cruise ships, we had container ships, we had all of these vessels come through that I was like, I just want to come see it. So I would do as much as I could without, obviously without affecting my work, but you're going to go see a ship. You got to go see a ship. So I would go down there and I just absorbed everything. And so such a fun experience just seeing that magnitude. I mean, those vessels are enormous, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Port of Boston isn't even the biggest port out there. It's probably maybe just off the top 10 list. Maybe it's just on the top 10 list, but cargo by volume. But I mean, to see that up close and to see how the port itself worked made me just such a better attorney. I mean, or just kind of fan of maritime generally. I got to see it so closely. And if you've seen one port, you've seen one, you've only seen that one. Ports are so different across the country and certainly across the world. But to actually be on the inside of a port and to really get to know it that intimately was so beneficial. And so then COVID happened, right? I was working at the port, moved up north, was working there a couple of years and COVID happened. So everyone got sent home. And I had young kids at the time and was just kind of how do I'd always wanted to do a independent consultant or I had this law degree that I was let me figure out and I had missed the national and international conversations that I was once having down in DC. I moved up north for kind of family reasons. Like I said, loved my time at the port, but was just kind of missing that larger discussion. So I thought, let's just do it. So started the company, started Squall Strategies, a law firm.
That's a cool name, by the way. Where did you come up with that name?
Thanks. Yeah. So, okay. I don't know if you guys remember this movie. It was from the 90s, White Squall, and not directly attributed it's, for copyright infringement or whatever purposes.
But for our listeners who don't know what a squall is, tell them that as well.
Yeah. So White Squall was a movie from the 90s. It had, God, who was it? Ryan Felipe, I think. It was, Meryl, you've seen this, right?
I'm terrible with names. But I know the plot line was there are students that go on a schooner and the schooner gets hit with a white squall and then some kids die and then there's this whole legal battle.
Oh, God, don't tell that. Spoiler alert, man.
Yeah.
Well,
I didn't say the end, so.
Okay. Nobody dies. So So Jeff Bridges, that's who was in it. Jeff Bridges. I mean, awesome. So squall itself is like a wall of water, like whether it's like a mythological, like this white squall in the movie, they kind of really hype it up as like just this white squall of like storm water that will like wreck your boat. A squall itself is just kind of like a bad storm, right? Like generally that's kind
out
of
of the blue. It's supposed to be all nice. It just shows up out of the blue and you're like, oh, that was a squall.
Exactly. Yeah. And when I was kind of coming up with like the name of the company, I was like, well, I don't want it to be like Blue Law, or like Ocean Law. Like, so I wanted something that was kind of like a nod to maritime, but not so like obvious. And so I was thinking about everything. I was like, okay, Rumline Law. I'm like, no, like, like Flotsam and Jetsam. I was like, no, that's like Little Mermaid. Like, I'm like, okay, what do I like? What am I looking for here? And so I was like, well, squall. All right. So that's like a storm, like, which is kind of like when you're calling an attorney, right? You're in like the middle of a storm of sorts. And then strategies was like, okay, well, how do you like navigate out of it?
Love it. Love it.
So like the more that like I kind of dissect the name, and I don't do it all the time, but like the more that I kind of think about the name, like, it works so perfect for this reason. Like I didn't even purposely mean that squall, storm, like as an attorney, I'll help you. But like now it just all comes together. And it's that nod, right? Like squall, like has a maritime connection to it. So it's like you kind of know without knowing much about me or the company that it's going to be a maritime-ish like discussion.
Yeah, so, if you're in maritime, for sure.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and I'm not going to get somebody calling me to do a divorce form, right? Because like they're going to be like, small strategy. That doesn't sound like a law firm, like. But then if you read into it, and you're like, oh shoot, she knows her stuff, and like, I get it. I get that squall thing.
Cool. So then squall strategy started, and what sort of clients were you getting?
Yeah, so so it's turned into like a really, so obviously I worked at the Federal Maritime Commission, and so they regulate the industry of ocean shipping. And so we've heard a lot over the past couple of years, right? Container-gaddon, all the congestion on the West Coast and LA and all these, container boxes just being stuck and moving. And like now they're having all these demurrage detention, which is basically, so demurrage is if the box gets offloaded the ship and it goes onto the yard and you get probably like a week. You don't have to pick it up that day, but you probably get like a week of like, okay, you can keep your box here, but like, look, this is a loading zone. This is not a warehouse. And so if you keep it on the terminal or on the yard for too long, then you're allowed to charge some rent for that. And what they call it is demurrage. So that's basically what it is you might get a couple days of like, okay, look, $50 a day, but like, you got to come get your stuff. And then if you don't get your stuff for like another couple days, maybe a week, then they're going to be like, look, $250 a day, get your stuff out of here. Like, this is not a loading zone. So it's supposed to be kind of incentivizing people to go grab their stuff. Same principle applies for detention, which is basically the use of the box itself. So, the box you get for a certain number of days after it's come in or whatever the terms are. You got to take your stuff out of it and then you got to give it back as an empty so that it can go get loaded up again and used again. Kind of like a milk carton, like a milk crate, right? If you're like, get your milk delivered or any of that, like it's for everybody to use. So you got to like kind of, you're done using it, we'll scoot it along. So, so those are the two things that were really big issues happening during all this container-gaddon, congestion stuff that was happening with the pandemic.
People
it was a perfect storm of like everything happening. People were buying like crazy. And so 90% of everything moves by ocean shipment because it's coming into the country. I mean, that's like the computers, that's the clothes for the most part,
the cars,
right.
Everything.
Cars, garlic is imported sometimes, like, like meat is imported, like, so 90% of everything. Yeah, avocados, right? Like, and it's not just over the road, like it's on the ocean. So, so 90% of everything is moving by ocean transit. And so that really highlighted it. All that congestion and container-gaddon highlighted this industry that was otherwise just kind of like a forgotten, well, yeah, of course it works. Like the same way you don't remind yourself to breathe, you just kind of assume that the supply chain works, right? I mean, couldn't be further from the truth. And now it's just kind of one of those where, as a society, a little bit more aware of what supply chain is, what makes it work, what doesn't make it work, like the stress points, the pain points. So what I do, some of my clients, I work with companies, I work with shipping companies. So the shippers, so the people who actually have the goods that are moving those goods. I've gotten a lot of inquiries recently on detention and demurrage. So the FMC has kind of some rules around when you're allowed to apply demurrage or detention or how it's supposed to be applied. And it was being applied and just general charges, kind of the FMC chairman, Dan Maffei, at one point during a hearing was talking about kind of just general charges that were showing up on these invoices after containers were being moved. And he kind of was like, look, bogus charges have no place. It's kind of like your cable bill.
Wow.
Like, a cable bill, you sign up to pay $50 and by the time you know it, like you're paying the bill, it's $175. Like, what the heck is this extra stuff?
Yeah.
So he was kind of saying,
like, you wouldn't expect that from like an industry at this scale. Wow.
Right. Yeah. So it happens. And so, that's what he was like, look, we got to kind of rein this in. We got to figure this out, that like we can't have so many extra charges. And so one thing that Congress created over the summer was the Ocean Shipping Reform Act, which was a modification of the Shipping Act. And so now we're getting kind of legal, right? So the Shipping Act is basically like the law created by Congress originally in 1984 that kind of outlines, okay, here's all the rules for like ocean shipping. And that's what gives the FMC its power, the Federal Maritime Commission. That's what gives it all its power. And like, okay, we're going to say the FMC is the agency that's supposed to deal with all this stuff. So over the summer, Congress was like, look, this like S is hitting the fan. I don't know if I can swear on your podcast. So
you can't. Yeah, we might be,
okay.
but go for it. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Well, I'm going to say stuff's hitting the fan. So just in case. So like, Congress got involved and was like, we want to do something. So they made a new law that kind of modified a few things from that original Shipping Act. And so one of those things is charge complaints. And so if shippers, if owners of the cargo have complaints, have like disputes against some of these charges that they were getting, you could now bring those to the Federal Maritime Commission in kind of an easier, quicker way than a full formal litigation. I'm going to bring a lawsuit.
Court of law, this, that.
Yeah. You can still do that, right? That's still available. But like, that's where I've been helping a lot of these kind of cargo owners, beneficial cargo owners, or like the shippers. So these importers or exporters, I've been kind of helping them navigate, so what are some of these new rules? What are some of the crappy things that happen to you during all the container getting congestion stuff? What recourse do you have? Like, can you take this to FMC? Because FMC also acts as a court in ways. So all of the commissioners kind of act as judges. So you can actually bring like a real lawsuit, or they have these kind of smaller, less intense versions that if your ultimate goal is just get some justification and some kind of restitution and basically like be kind of cured and like, just the same way that you'd bring any lawsuit, right? So I help kind of navigate all the different options, that you have going forward there. So yeah, I help navigate and help the shippers just navigate the process. So, but I also work with associations. And so not just shippers and not just people who want to go sue, but like, there's some associations, shipping company or shipper associations that just want some translation of what the federal agencies are doing. How it might apply to a certain commodity, a certain industry. So yeah, I have a very specialized, because I worked their intimate knowledge of this previously unknown agency, but I had to learn it, in order to not only negotiate some of its terms with foreign countries, but then I would also get to know the other parts of maritime for both foreign countries, that we were talking to, and also the U.S. other agencies, because they were also at the table, like, well, these are our interests. These are our interests. So like, what a great way to like learn it all, right? Like, I knew it at the time, but like also as you're learning it to like, every instance that you're in, every kind of moment that you're in, you can either see it as like a learning opportunity or like a struggle. And so certainly it's both a lot of times, but like, you kind of, if you can also absorb like the knowledge that you're gaining from the struggle. I have a very unique industry knowledge, expertise. And so that's where I fit in.
This show was sponsored by
Boat RX.
Imagine it's the dead of summer and you're on your boat sweltering. Hell, you might even have that air conditioner running. But what about that nasty generator noise, huh?
Boat RX, an industry leader in highly efficient air conditioning on yachts. We produce power from a variety of sources when and where it's available. Whether that's with energy-dense batteries or high-power alternators, an efficient air conditioning solution can change the whole boating experience.
Your solitude or family gatherings won't suffer from that loud generator noise anymore. Get ready for summer. Check us out at www.boatrx.com.
Welcome back to the SHIPSHAPE podcast.
Let me ask you, how much opportunity is there in this space? If someone was trying to get in.
Yeah. So like from like a cargo owner or like doing what I do?
Do what you do.
The law side.
Oh, yeah. I mean, so there aren't so there's some big firms out there, but like to be kind of a specialized niche, I mean, there's room for all of us. I'm not, if you kind of hire the personality as much as you hire the knowledge, sometimes because you want to really be able to trust the person that you're chatting with. And so, you're probably getting this through the airwaves right now. Like I'm a pretty approachable person. Like, my whole thing is I like to translate it so that people can understand it, because I feel like in order for the supply chain to fix itself and be kind of this long-term thing, we all need to really understand what each other's saying. So I work across the lines. Like I talk to truckers, right? Like I'm an ocean person, but I talk to surface transport because I want the surface side to understand what the ocean struggles are, the same way that the ocean side needs to understand the surface side. So there's a lot of opportunity for those breaking down those silos and just kind of coming into this legal translation world. That's kind of how I really approach it is, certainly there's some litigation and all of that, but, I really enjoy the translation side of it and the really kind of consulting, the strategies as the Squall strategy suggests.
So Lauren, tell us, I mean, you've obviously handled a bunch of cases by now. What's like your best case or your worst case, like most memorable case?
Well, I don't know if I can go into all of that.
Well, but just, keep it vague.
Interesting cases. Okay, so let's just talk interesting cases generally, not cases that I've had myself. But so there have been some pretty interesting cases happening over the past few years because of all the container congestion. So the FMC has an enforcement arm. So they have a whole office that kind of goes after violators of the Shipping Act. And so that type of stuff made its way into the State of the Union. So President Biden even mentioned cartels, cartel shipping companies. They're not exactly cartels. Like his speechwriters didn't exactly get that right. I mean, they're kind of cartels, but they're given a limited exemption so cartels being like antitrust, like they're all binding together and they're like making it so it's not a competitive market. They don't exactly do that. So the same way that we have airline alliances out there in the world. So you have the Star Alliance and you might have like Delta and United and, whatever, like you book through Delta, but you might actually be on like a regional hopper plane that's doing business as Delta. The same thing happens on the ocean shipping side. And so we have all these ocean alliances. There's 3 of them that are combining not rates, but equipment. So that's what's happening on the ocean side. And so the way that it was presented at the State of the Union was like, oh, they're all like, conspiring with each other. They can't talk about rates. They're not allowed to talk about rates. So if they were, the FMC would severely fine them. And they're not allowed to kind of do unreasonable or unjust activity. And there's all sorts of ways that the FMC kind of defines that, different ways these ocean carriers are maybe kind of breaking the law or violating. And so there have been some cases recently that have been like $2 million of like enforcement actions, right? Like big bucks that like these companies, because they're getting a slap on the wrist from the FMC, are now having to like just pay out. But these are the same companies that we're hearing in the news that have made $2 billion in the last quarter, right? Like $5 billion. Like these are Apple prices, right? Like this is nuts because in 2010, maybe 2010, 2011, 2012, like early 2010s, and maybe even a couple of years before, these same ocean carriers were lucky to break even. So like they're making billions of dollars. They were lucky to break even. In general, ocean carriers stay right around that like break even.
What changed then? What does that mean in 10 years?
So crazy. It's kind of like, okay, econ generally, right? Like crazy demand. And with the reduction of like people being able to work in the port, I mean, ocean shipping requires people in person. And so you have an international health emergency where people aren't allowed to work next to each other. How do you get people on a ship, right? Like you're all working next to each other. How do you get people at a port? They're all working next to each other. And then if one goes down, you have 100 go down, right? That's what we were seeing. So especially at the ports, we were finding that people were working in kind of like teams. So there was team A, team B, like platooning. And so if team A went down, at least you could still call in team B. And then hopefully 2 weeks later, you could pull team A back in. So, it was partly like the operations were kind of constricting. the vessels were maybe constricting because you didn't have as many mariners to be able to go out there, or maybe the mariners were getting stuck on the vessels, because how do you do a 2-series vaccine on somebody who's not going to be the same place 2 or 3 weeks later to go get the vaccine, right? Like, so, and then at the same time, nobody's allowed to travel internationally, but that's what mariners do. They're traveling internationally. Like, they're not allowed to get off the ship. So a lot of the operations of ocean shipping really went haywire. And so you had that happen. And then you had, so everything's getting a little bit more funky and difficult. And then you start having, okay, so everybody's just buying a ton of crap. And so like, you're just having an influx of stuff coming into the US, but like they can't get it out to the people fast enough. So then the warehouses start getting overfilled. So then if a warehouse gets overfilled, you can't take the stuff out of the box to go store it because the warehouse is filled. So now you're getting stuff stored in the box. And remember, we talked, if you have stuff in a box for too long, you're going to get charged these incentive fees to get your stuff out of the box. So if you're
fees.
Right. So then you're starting to get like crazy fees because you have nowhere else to put it. But like, what are you going to just put it on the highway? So some of these containers were sitting on the highway because the chassis. Wow. So these containers don't have wheels, right? They're just a box. So they need a chassis in order to move over the road. But like you need the chassis to go get the next box because is it more expensive to get the penalty on the box use, or is it more expensive to get the penalty at the terminal, at the yard? Because, okay, so now you have this box full of stuff. You can't empty it out to put it in a warehouse, but then back up one chain link of the supply chain, that box came off a ship. So now you get all these new boxes coming off the ship onto the warehouse. You don't know what to do with your current boxes that are landside. And now you have more boxes coming off the ship. And so then you're getting charged for the terminal, for the yard that all these boxes are sitting on. So you're getting charged extra for the box itself, and you're getting charged for the yard that it's sitting on. I mean, that's why they were making billions of dollars, because like, they were charging, but it was an impossibility of pickup. Like there was nowhere for it to go. There was either no chassis, there was no driver. The terminal itself, the yard itself, the port was saying, no, you can't come in because we have to reorganize that section or whatever. And so that's where the FMC, and that's where a lot of my discussions these days is coming in, is that fair? Right? Like the charge is supposed to incentivize you to get your crap out of here. But and you're like, I want to, but there's nowhere for it to go. Like, I want my stuff out of it. I don't want it to sit at the yard. Like, I don't make money if it's sitting at the port. So should those terminals and those carriers still have been able to charge that, get your stuff out of here money?
Wow.
So that's kind of a long-winded way of saying that's kind of what the problem was. So that's a 101, really.
And then, so I want to take a little deeper. I've heard that like a lot of land law is based on maritime law. And how close is that? I think it's way closer than most people realize.
Yeah. So coal regs, it's kind of like the navigational international standard for like how boats maneuver. So, if boats are approaching each other, it's not like you going left, you going right. It's like you actually have signals, you have lights, you have like horns. So there's all sorts of kind of very prescriptive, specific ways of moving around. And so that found its way, in a rough sense, to the land side. I mean, really, that's us driving cars. And kind of some of the rules of the road. It's called rules of the road for the water, but rules of the road for land side too. And to take it even a little bit further, so we talked about law of the sea earlier, which is really kind of like the international navigation. So like safe innocent passage. So like you can be, if you're just sailing past a foreign country, as long as you're just kind of innocently passing through, and it depends on how far away you are from the land side, but as long as you're kind of just passing through, that ship is just passing through, you're mostly fine, right? Innocent passage. And those are some of the things that are included in this international law of the sea, this constitution of the oceans, if you will. That is roughly being applied to space law. So like, right? Because it's kind of the same idea, like international law of the sea. So United Nations Convention for the Law of the Sea was started in like the 40s, 50s, ultimately finished up in the 80s, and like was talking about deep sea drilling. There was no way to deep sea drill, right? Like 200 nautical miles offshore at the time. So it's kind of that same idea of like so conceptual and theory based, but like you need to kind of create a rule that will one day apply to that. So now this law of the sea in kind of general theories is roughly being applied to space law. Pretty cool, huh?
Wow, pretty cool.
Maritime's
So you're ready.
everywhere. Who doesn't like maritime, right?
Yeah, you're ready for the space age.
Now, some of the more fun maritime law questions. I've heard stories that if you go far enough out, there's like, you can get like a cruise when there's like cocaine and like laws don't apply and all this other type of stuff. Is that true?
Not totally. I mean, yes and no. So I don't know about cocaine specifically for the most part. For the most part, like drugs are not like permitted. So law of the sea, same thing. So the United Nations Convention for the Law of the Sea, there's some kind of general crimes against humanity. Piracy is one of those. Like slave trade is one of those. I don't remember if drug running is part of that or not, but I mean, I think it might be. So basically, high seas, beyond 200 nautical miles offshore of all countries, you get into high seas. And so unless there's some other claim that maybe there's an island close by or whatever, as long as you're 200 or more nautical miles away from everything around you, you're in the middle of nowhere. That's called the high seas. And that's where it's like, there are no laws other than there's some crimes against humanity that are still included in this, like, but you can't do these few things because as a society, as like an international society, we've determined these are like bad things. So that's kind of, so yes, like yes and no, because the whole intention of law of the sea is the closer you are to the land, the more the land should have rights over the water, right? Because like you don't want people to be able to like be full guns drawn, just passing by, you know, like off of Narragansett Bay in Rhode Island, like you want some sort of kind of like protection as you're close to the land. The land is so like interconnected with the water, you know, that there's some kind of protection for the coastal state. The further away you go, though, the more like freedom of the seas should apply, right? Like you're out in the middle of nowhere. If I'm out in the middle of nowhere, I shouldn't have like, I don't know, let's say like Brazil be able to tell me what to do if I'm like out somewhere halfway between Africa and Brazil. Like it's so like it. So that's what the creators were when they drafted the United Nations Convention for the Law of the Sea were kind of thinking was like, okay, there's still some like bad stuff, but in general, the further out you go, like the less the coastal state should have anything to do with it. And the more it should just be like everybody water. And so that's kind of what it is. You obviously, if you do like the flag of the vessel, then that's where you're flying around. Then the laws of that flag can apply on that vessel itself. But you know, it's pretty technical too.
Wow.
Could you talk on piracy a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, so it's an international
around?
crime against humanity, right? Like it's not allowed, even though everybody loves pirate pub crawls, pirate everything. I mean. So Captain Phillips, I don't know if you've seen that movie.
I just watched it earlier today.
Really? It's so good. It's so good.
Not too funny.
But like, you know, so piracy is terrible. Like, you know, let's just put that out there. But like, isn't that such a fascinating movie and such a fascinating study, piracy off Somalia? Like, they are pirates out of necessity, not out of want, because they feel as though they, you know, they used to be fishermen, or maybe they still are, but like the society of Somalia couldn't survive based like only on what it was. And so they're, from my, you know, basic understanding, so they needed to kind of supplement and expand their reach and survival. And so that's it. So it's kind of a hierarchical structure. Like the elders of the Somali people are the negotiators. Like it's a pretty fascinating thing. But it's pretty terrifying, right? Like if you're part of, I guess, Western culture and you're sailing through that area and you get, you know, a pirate attack of Captain Phillips.
Yeah, I'm the captain now.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing too. Like you can't have arms on board, and like it's really limited, because then maybe you might not be able to go into certain ports if you have weapons on board, and it all gets very kind of complicated. So how do you protect yourself? And so they're armed with what, like water cannons and piercing noises. Like it's all a little comical. I'm like, how are we not able to like fend off? You know, they have sawed-off shotguns essentially, right? Or I don't even know like what they have, but like they're coming in on a little skiff, a little fishing boat against this huge tanker or container ship or whatever it is. And like you saw, it was just one water hose was pointing the wrong direction. They were able to shimmy up that ladder and get on board.
Well, that's some fascinating stuff.
Who doesn't like maritime law, right? Like who doesn't like maritime law? It's so fun.
That's pretty cool. So far we've gotten to squall strategies, right? And then you kept doing more stuff after squall strategies.
Yeah. So I started a second company called the Maritime Professor, mostly because I was getting a lot of just inquiry. So obviously I'm passionate about this stuff, and I actually teach a few different courses. Endicott College has an MBA program for maritime economics. Roger Williams, obviously where I went, my alma mater, has a maritime law program. So I teach law of the sea there, international law of the sea, as a law class there. And then I also teach over at Mass Maritime Academy. So they have a graduate program series of a couple different avenues for doing master's programs through Massachusetts Maritime Academy. So I was teaching all these different areas, and I was getting questions through the law company, the law firm, that were not really legal, right? Like not all questions are legal. And so I was like, how do I figure out a way of like sharing this knowledge? Obviously I'm trying to monetize it, but like, how do I share this knowledge? Like, so I'm starting to create some e-courses. So themaritimeprofessor.com. And that's what it is I'm creating these online courses that are kind of 101. So the same way that we're chatting about some of this stuff here, I'm just speaking in regular people terms and like breaking down some of these kind of otherwise complex ideas. And so, truckers are interested. Like I said, I talk a lot on Freight Waves, where it's a lot of over the road surface truckers who just want to know a little bit more about like where this cargo comes from on the ocean side. And so I can break it down, like how we talked about extension and demurrage. You might call it per diem on the over the road side or on the land side or on the rail side. And a lot of times it means the same thing. And just kind of introducing some of these general topics, like through the Maritime Professor, I've also created a podcast of my own called By Land and By Sea, an attorney breaking down the week in supply chain. And that's it. Every Friday at 1, I hop on for about a half hour or so and just kind of break down either what's happening that week or maybe some of the new rules that are happening around the Federal Maritime Commission, but like in real people speak, like I give you a little bit of my impression of like, well, this is a bad idea, or like, no, I like this. I'm into this. I think this is cool. I think we're moving in the right direction. And so that's kind of, it just, if we don't speak the same language, we're never going to move forward as kind of an industry or as a country for supply chain. And like I said, 90% of everything that all Americans consume, use, eat comes over ocean shipping at some point. So like, arguably everybody should have an interest in it. I get it. Not everybody's as interested, obviously, as I am. But like, it's maybe it's just for the generally curious, but maybe it's for some of these cargo owners, these importers or exporters that are like, I don't need to know much, but I would like to know more. Like I would like to just know a little bit more, maybe the intro of like who the agencies are, or what are some of the laws involved, or like, why did my stuff suddenly get so expensive? What are all these charges on here? So that's what I'm covering in these e-courses and putting out. And, just kind of a nice, approachable, educational, there isn't somebody out there who just puts it all together in like a nice little, what does this mean? And that's what I'm trying to do.
So as we kind of come to an end here, what are some pro tips that you would give for someone, thinking about trying to enter, your side of the industry?
Yeah, I mean, have that natural curiosity. Like if you're already like passionate or interested in, maybe it's maritime, maybe it's something else, but like allow yourself to be curious and passionate and just like run down these curiosities. I didn't know that I could create like my own company out of just, I don't know, this is cool. Like, I just want to learn more. And so, like I said, that podcast I started because one, I wanted to like tell people like, I know things, you should hire me. But on the other, it was like, it also kept me honest on staying up to date on everything that's going on out there. And it gave me kind of a voice of like, instead of like just boring my family with like, did you see this new rule came out? Like, I could actually put it out there, and now I can kind of have engagement with people.
It's useful.
Like, yeah, they could be like, oh my God, I saw that rule too. I'm like, right? You saw it. Wasn't that crazy? Yeah. Like, I mean, who geeks out over rules besides lawyers? But, there's so much applicability to it all. Like, there's so much like, it affects everybody, whether you care to learn about it or not. And so, like I said, the suggestion really is like, if you have a passion, you'll find ways of monetizing it out there. You'll find ways of finding your path, but like just keep it along the lines of something you're interested in.
And then Lauren, you've been doing this for a while. Like, what are some of the trends you've seen changing, whether that's from the legal side or the maritime industry as a whole?
Yeah, certainly. Society knowing what I do. I mean, like I said, nobody knew, and nobody knew about like how things arrived at the grocery stores other than like, oh, a truck brings it. It's like, well, okay, well, where'd the truck get it? Farm. Like, well, not always. So yeah, I mean, so I was at Trader Joe's in the middle of not the middle, maybe toward the end of the pandemic. And I had my cashier was kind of talking to me about, well, we're out of a few things. And I was like, oh yeah, all right, kind of just chit chat. And she's like, it's because we can't get the bottles in. They're stuck in some of those barges. She said barges. They were the vessels offshore of the West Coast. We have the syrup, but we can't get the bottles in. And without the bottles, we can't put it all together. And well, that's what the supply chain is. And I was like, oh my God, like she didn't know that I obviously like was a supply chain person, but like, I was like, this is my perfect moment. Like here I am in society, like I'm having just a general chit chat conversation about supply chain. I was like, oh my, personal restraint. So I wasn't like, oh my God, right. And then this and then that. Like, I was like, oh, that is so cool, right? Like, well, how awesome, like that you can just have supply chain conversations, and I think that I've also seen a better appreciation for truckers, so like I'm so ocean, but like truckers, so there's all this like, oh, we have trucker shortage. We don't have a trucker shortage. We have a crappy trucker job, like series out there. Like to be a trucker these days, nobody wants to let you use the bathroom. Nobody wants to let you, like rest anywhere. There's not enough parking. You have all of these restrictions on how long you're allowed to drive, which is fine. That's okay. That keeps everybody safe. But on the other hand, like it's just, maybe you don't get paid a lot, especially on the drayage side. So drayage are the truckers that go pick up at the port. They only get paid per load and not necessarily the time spent. And so when we have high congestion, we don't really have, those truckers are not getting paid to just sit there in the traffic. And so it might be 2 hours before they can get into a terminal. And so that sucks, right? So I've seen a shift and maybe a higher appreciation and just knowing that like truckers, port workers, everybody's like the backbone of society. And like, they just want people to know what they do. And mariners, like, that we have people who go out to sea for weeks and months at a time. And like, they are the reason why the entire globe still functions and we don't run out of toilet paper. But people didn't know that before. And maybe they still don't. But, to find maritime and ocean shipping in the State of the Union, even though a little bit incorrectly stated, but like, that was kind of a big deal. So I don't know. I hope that people are going to continue to pay attention to it, even when, everything is reliably back on the shelves. But Santa will still come this year. You'll still have plenty of things to buy. We're not past all the congestion and supply chain troubles. It kind of is a pendulum swinging. It's still kind of going back and forth and finding its neutral balance. And it's going to be new. Every time there's a shakeup, we're going to find a new normal. And God, how many times have we heard that? But just the appreciation for all of these essential workers that wasn't there before. Nurses, to not take anything away from nurses, but there were more than just, and doctors. There's more than just nurses and doctors keeping this country afloat during this last pandemic. So,
I sure hope that Santa doesn't have a supply chain issue with the coal I deserve this year.
Plenty of coal. That's over the road trucking. That's domestic.
So, Lauren, where can people find you and hear more about what you're doing?
Yeah, so like I said, themaritimeprofessor.com and my podcast on Fridays at 1 gets posted on the podcast later that afternoon. By Landed by Sea, an attorney breaking down the week in supply chain, available on all podcast platforms. So after you listen to this one and subscribe to SHIPSHAPE, then come over to By Landed by Sea. And then the Squall Strategies. If you really do have a legal question, feel free to reach out. Squall Strategies, squallstrategies.com. Happy to chat with you if you are anywhere in the supply chain and you just have some questions, you want to run some things past me. Let's figure out what's going on. But so happy to be here with you guys today. Thanks so much for having me on.
Fun chat. No, thank you. We've had these questions for a while. We've been looking for a good lawyer. Glad we found them.
Well, like I said, I'm a little atypical lawyer in that, I hope I speak just normally. I want everyone to understand what's going on out there.
Awesome.
Nice.
It's great.
Really appreciate the time, Lauren. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Check back every Tuesday for our latest episode. And be sure to like, share and subscribe to ShipShape.pro.